During Christmas Eve dinner, my cousin stood up to make a toast. We all pooled our money and bought a boat for my parents. Everyone clapped and cheered. Then my mom turned to me and said, "We used your savings for the final payment. Hope you don't mind." I stayed quiet, took a slow sip of my wine, and then placed my phone on the table. The video I played next turned the entire room silent, and by midnight, half of them were blowing up my phone with missed calls. I, 32M, sat at the far end of the dining table that Christmas Eve, nursing my third glass of wine while my extended family laughed and chatted around platters of glazed ham and roasted vegetables. The dining room smelled like pine and cinnamon, with twinkling lights casting warm shadows across faces I'd known my entire life. My mom sat near the head of the table, looking radiant in her red sweater, completely unaware that this would be the last peaceful Christmas dinner our family would ever have. My cousin stood up suddenly, tapping his glass with a fork until the room fell silent. He had that satisfied grin plastered across his face, the kind people wear when they're about to deliver news they think will make them look generous. He cleared his throat dramatically and announced that he, along with several other family members, had pooled their money together to buy my parents a boat. A beautiful 30-foot cabin cruiser they'd been eyeing at the marina for months. The room erupted in applause. My aunt started crying happy tears. My father looked genuinely shocked, his hand pressed against his chest. Everyone crowded around my parents, congratulating them, asking when they'd take it out for the first voyage. My uncle joked about being invited for the maiden voyage. The energy in that room was electric, celebratory, almost magical. Then my mother turned to me with that smile she always wore when she was about to confess something she'd already decided I'd forgive her for. She said they'd used my savings account for the final payment on the boat, but she hoped I didn't mind since it was for such a good cause. She said it so casually, like she was telling me they'd borrowed my car for a grocery run. The room didn't go completely silent, but enough people heard it that a pocket of quiet spread around us. A few family members glanced my way, probably expecting me to laugh it off or say something gracious about family coming first. My cousin was still standing, looking confused about why the celebratory mood had shifted. I took a slow sip of my wine, set the glass down carefully, and pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I'd been waiting for this moment for 3 weeks, ever since I discovered what they'd done. I'd spent those weeks documenting, recording, gathering evidence. I'd spent sleepless nights debating whether I should burn everything down or just walk away quietly. But sitting there, watching them all celebrate a purchase made with money stolen from me, I decided they deserved to know exactly who they'd been applauding. I placed my phone on the table and pressed play on a video I'd compiled. The first few seconds showed my bank statements from 8 months ago, clearly displaying my savings account balance of $47,000. Money I'd saved over 6 years working double shifts at the hospital, picking up extra hours, skipping vacations, living in a modest apartment while my friends bought houses. Money I'd been saving for a down payment on my own place. The video showed the withdrawal history. Multiple transfers over 3 months, all authorized with my mother's name as a joint account holder. She'd added herself to my account when I was 23, back when I was fresh out of college, and she'd convinced me it was smart to have someone who could access the account in case of emergencies. I'd never thought to remove her. The room was starting to pay attention now. A few people had stopped eating. My cousin sat down slowly, his triumphant expression fading. The next part of the video showed text messages. Screenshots of conversations between my mother and my aunt, discussing how much money they needed to close the deal on the boat. My mother writing that she could access my account without me knowing. My aunt responding that I probably wouldn't even notice since I rarely checked my balance. Both of them laughing about how I was always too busy at work to pay attention to my finances. My father's face had gone pale. He was staring at my mother, who'd frozen with her fork halfway to her mouth. But I wasn't finished. The video continued with more screenshots, these ones showing a group chat between my mother, my aunt, my cousin, and 2 other relatives. They were discussing how to handle it if I found out before Christmas. My cousin had suggested they could gaslight me into thinking I'd authorized the transfers and forgotten about them. My aunt recommended they tell me the money was a family investment that I'd eventually benefit from when my parents passed and I inherited the boat. Someone near the middle of the table made a choking sound. My grandmother, who'd been beaming just minutes before, was clutching her napkin with white knuckles. The final section of the video showed bank records I'd obtained through a police report I'd filed 2 weeks earlier. The report detailed theft and unauthorized use of funds. It showed the detective's notes, confirming that charges would be filed after the holidays. It showed the lawyer's letter I'd sent to my parents, formally demanding full repayment within 30 days or facing criminal prosecution. The video ended with a simple text overlay that read, "Family doesn't steal. Thieves do." The silence that followed was suffocating. Someone's chair scraped against the floor. My younger sister was staring at our mother with her mouth open. My father had his head in his hands. My mother finally found her voice and asked what I thought I was doing. She tried to sound authoritative, but her voice cracked halfway through. She started explaining that the money was just sitting there, that I wasn't using it, that she'd planned to pay me back eventually. She said family was supposed to help each other, that I was being selfish and dramatic. I stood up, pocketed my phone, and told her that she had 29 days left to return every cent. I mentioned that the detective I'd been working with had assured me that joint account fraud was still prosecutable, especially with the text messages proving premeditation and conspiracy. I explained that my lawyer had already drafted the civil suit paperwork for conversion of assets. My aunt tried to interject, saying I was ruining Christmas over money, that family was more important than some savings account. She said my parents had raised me and sacrificed for me, that I owed them. I looked at her and said that if she felt so strongly about it, she could contribute her share of the boat money toward my restitution. The room went quiet again. She looked away. My cousin, who'd started this whole celebration, tried a different approach. He said we could work this out as a family, that maybe we were all overreacting. He suggested we could set up a payment plan, make this right without involving lawyers and police. I told him that if he'd felt that way, he shouldn't have participated in a group chat discussing how to manipulate me if I discovered the theft. I reminded him that his messages suggested telling people I was mentally unstable if I made a scene. My grandmother started crying then, real tears this time. She said she'd had no idea any of this was happening, that she'd contributed $5,000 to the boat fund thinking everyone had given voluntarily. She looked betrayed, hurt. She asked my mother how she could have done this. My mother's face had shifted from defensive to desperate. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back. She said she'd made a mistake, that she'd gotten caught up in wanting to do something special for my father's retirement. She claimed my aunt had pressured her, that she'd felt obligated to help when family was counting on her. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair and told her that her mistake had cost her a son. I said that the $47,000 she'd stolen represented 6 years of my life, thousands of hours of exhaustion and sacrifice. I mentioned that I'd missed weddings, birthdays, and vacations to save that money while she'd spent months plotting how to take it without asking. My father finally spoke up, his voice rough. He said he hadn't known where the money came from for the final payment. He claimed my mother had told him they'd taken out a small loan. He looked at her with something between anger and disbelief. She started to respond, but I'd heard enough. I told the room that anyone who'd participated in the group chat or encouraged the theft should expect to hear from my attorney. I said that anyone who'd contributed to the boat fund honestly could request their money back through legal channels, since the asset was purchased partially with stolen funds. I walked toward the door, and my younger sister followed me into the hallway. She'd been away at graduate school during most of this and had no idea what was happening. She asked me to wait, to not leave like this. She said she believed me, that she was horrified by what our mother had done, but she wanted to understand everything. I spent 20 minutes in the hallway with her, showing her additional documentation I'd gathered. Bank statements, the police report, the lawyer's letters. She kept shaking her head, saying she couldn't believe our mother would do this. She asked what she could do to help. I told her the best thing she could do was protect her own finances and not let our mother have access to any of her accounts. I warned her that people who steal once often do it again, especially if they think they can justify it as being for family. She hugged me before I left, crying into my shoulder. She said she was sorry, that she'd talk to our father and try to get him to understand the gravity of what had happened. She promised she'd stay in touch regardless of what happened with the rest of the family. I drove home that night through empty streets, passing houses lit up with Christmas decorations, families visible through windows exchanging gifts and laughter. My phone started buzzing before I'd even made it to the highway. Update 1. By midnight, I had 37 missed calls and over 60 text messages. Most were from family members who'd been at dinner, but some were from relatives who'd heard about the incident secondhand. The messages ranged from apologetic to hostile, from supportive to accusatory. My uncle, who'd joked about the boat's maiden voyage, sent a long message apologizing. He said he'd had no idea about the stolen money and had contributed $3,000 thinking it was a legitimate family gift. He asked how he could help and whether I'd accept his testimony if legal proceedings moved forward. My aunt, the one who'd participated in the group chat, sent a series of defensive messages. She claimed I'd taken screenshots out of context, that the conversation had been hypothetical, that nobody had actually intended to manipulate me. She said I was tearing the family apart over money and that I'd regret this. My cousin sent a brief message saying he wanted to stay out of it and asked that I not involve him in any legal matters. I didn't respond. Several relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly reached out, having heard various versions of what happened. Some asked if it was true. Others offered unsolicited advice about forgiveness and family bonds. A few suggested I was being vindictive and should consider therapy. My grandmother called 6 times. I finally answered on the 7th call. She was devastated, kept saying she never would have contributed if she'd known. She asked whether I'd really pursue criminal charges against my own mother. She said she understood I was hurt, but worried about what this would do to the family long term. I explained to her that my mother had 3 weeks left to return the money before I had to make a decision about pressing charges. I said that I'd given her every opportunity to come clean and make it right before involving the police. I reminded her that I'd discovered the theft 2 months ago and had spent weeks trying to decide how to handle it before finally filing the police report. My grandmother asked why I hadn't come to her first, why I hadn't tried to resolve this privately within the family. I told her that I'd actually approached my mother 6 weeks ago, confronted her with the bank statements, and asked for an explanation. She denied everything at first, then claimed it was a misunderstanding, then finally admitted she'd borrowed the money but insisted she had every intention of paying it back. When I demanded a timeline and documentation, she'd stopped responding to my calls. That's when I'd gone to the police. My father called around 1 in the morning. He sounded exhausted, defeated. He said he'd been going through their financial records and had found evidence that my mother had taken out a second mortgage on their house 6 months ago. Money that should have gone toward paying down debt had disappeared. He'd confronted her after I left, and she'd finally admitted that she'd been financially struggling for over a year. The boat wasn't just a gift for him, but also an attempt to maintain appearances, to show the extended family that they were still doing well. He said he was filing for separation. After 34 years of marriage, he was done. He said the theft from me was bad enough, but discovering she'd been hiding their financial situation and making major decisions without him was too much. He apologized for not protecting me, for not paying closer attention to our family's finances. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me felt vindicated that he was taking this seriously. Another part felt guilty for potentially causing their divorce. He sensed my hesitation and said firmly that this wasn't my fault, that my mother had made her choices and now had to face the consequences. Update 2. The week after Christmas was surreal. My mother's siblings organized a family meeting without inviting me, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. My sister attended and reported back that it had been chaos. Half the family was demanding my mother return the money immediately, while the other half was insisting I was overreacting and should drop the charges. My aunt, the one from the group chat, had suggested they all contribute to a fund to pay me back, but only if I agreed to delete the video, retract the police report, and never speak about this publicly. My sister had apparently stood up and told them that I didn't owe them anything, that negotiating under duress wasn't acceptable, and that they should be ashamed for protecting a thief instead of supporting the victim. Several family members had walked out after that. My mother's lawyer contacted my lawyer with a settlement offer. She proposed returning $30,000 immediately if I'd agree to drop all charges and sign an NDA, preventing me from discussing the theft with family members or on social media. My lawyer's response was simple: full restitution plus interest and legal fees, or we proceed with both criminal and civil cases. No NDA required because the truth isn't negotiable. They countered with $35,000, then $40,000. My lawyer held firm. I'd made it clear I wasn't interested in negotiations that didn't include full repayment. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about accountability. The boat became a problem faster than anyone anticipated. My grandmother and uncle both formally requested their contributions back, threatening their own legal action if the money wasn't returned. Two other relatives who'd contributed made similar demands. My parents suddenly found themselves owning a boat they couldn't afford to keep, purchased with money that multiple people wanted refunded, including funds that were provably stolen. My father's lawyer sent a letter informing my mother that the boat was being considered a marital asset subject to division in their separation proceedings, but that any stolen funds used in its purchase would need to be repaid before asset distribution. Essentially, she'd created a legal nightmare where the boat couldn't be kept, sold, or divided until multiple claims against it were resolved. My cousin called me directly against his earlier statement about staying out of it. He said people were calling him complicit, that his professional reputation was being damaged by association. He worked in financial services, and somehow word had spread about the group chat discussing fraud and manipulation. He wanted to know what he could do to make this right. I told him he could start by providing a sworn statement to my lawyer detailing every conversation he'd participated in regarding the theft. He agreed immediately, desperate to distance himself from the situation. His testimony would prove premeditation and conspiracy, strengthening both the criminal and civil cases. I received an anonymous message warning me that I was destroying the family over money, that I'd regret this when everyone was gone and I was alone. It was sent from a new number, but the phrasing was similar to my mother's writing style. I forwarded it to my lawyer and the detective, adding it to the evidence of harassment. Update 3. By mid-January, the situation had reached its breaking point. My mother's lawyer finally advised her that she was going to lose both the criminal and civil cases badly if they went to trial. The evidence was overwhelming, and her attempts at negotiation had only made her look more guilty. Her lawyer suggested immediate full restitution and a plea deal on the criminal charges. 3 days before the preliminary hearing, my mother deposited $47,000 into a new account in my name only. She also paid $12,000 in interest and legal fees. The money came from the forced sale of the boat at a significant loss, a loan from her sister, and the liquidation of her retirement account. My lawyer filed paperwork showing restitution had been made, which improved her position for the criminal plea deal. The prosecutor offered her a deal: plead guilty to theft, accept 3 years probation, 200 hours community service, and mandatory financial counseling. The alternative was going to trial, where she'd likely face jail time given the premeditation evidence. She took the plea deal. The civil suit was settled with prejudice, meaning she admitted wrongdoing and waived any future claims. The settlement included a provision that she couldn't contest the terms of my father's divorce proceedings regarding division of assets. My father moved into an apartment near my sister. He'd lost 30 pounds and looked 10 years older than he had at Christmas. We met for coffee in February, and he apologized again for everything. He said he'd been blind to my mother's financial problems and character flaws, that he'd chosen to see what he wanted to see rather than confront difficult truths. He asked if we could rebuild our relationship slowly. I told him I'd like that, but it would take time. He understood. My mother sent a handwritten letter to my new address. She'd apparently gotten it from my sister. The letter was 6 pages of explanations, justifications, and eventually, buried near the end, something resembling an apology. She said she'd made terrible choices driven by pride and desperation. She claimed she'd convinced herself that the money would be replaced before I noticed, that she'd intended to pay it back from my father's pension. She wrote that losing her marriage, her reputation, and her relationship with me had been devastating. She said she understood if I never forgave her, but hoped that someday I'd understand she'd never meant to hurt me. I didn't respond to the letter. The extended family fractured completely. My grandmother maintained relationships with both me and my mother, carefully avoiding discussing the situation with either of us. My uncle and his wife sided with me, cutting contact with my mother entirely. My aunt from the group chat was essentially ostracized by half the family for her role in the planning. My cousin lost several clients when word spread about the incident, though he was never formally charged with anything. He blamed me publicly until his own lawyer advised him to stop, warning that defamation could add to his legal troubles. My sister became my strongest ally through all of this. She'd witnessed firsthand how family loyalty could be weaponized to enable abuse and theft. She made it clear to our mother that their relationship was conditional on genuine accountability and changed behavior. By spring, I'd moved into a new house, using the recovered funds plus additional savings for a down payment. I'd been promoted at work and was finally sleeping through the night again. The constant anxiety that had plagued me since discovering the theft had gradually faded. But the damage to my family was permanent. Looking back at that Christmas Eve dinner, I sometimes wondered if I should have handled it differently. Maybe I could have confronted my mother privately, given her a chance to make it right without the public humiliation. Maybe the family could have remained intact if I'd been willing to accept partial restitution and sweep the details under the rug. Then I remembered sitting at that table, watching everyone applaud a gift purchased with my stolen money. I remembered my mother's casual announcement, her complete lack of remorse until she was caught. I remembered the group chat plotting how to manipulate me if I discovered the truth. And I knew I'd made the right choice. Because families built on theft, lies, and manipulation aren't worth preserving. Sometimes burning everything down is the only way to clear the ground for something honest to grow in its place. That video played on Christmas Eve didn't just expose a theft. It revealed who everyone really was when their actions had consequences. And that revelation, painful as it was, turned out to be the greatest gift I could have received.